This is an interpretation of one of Ocean Vuong's poems entitled Aubade with Burning City. First, I'll read out the poem and then give a commentary, practically line by line, or taking into account large parts of the poem. So here goes. Aubade with Burning City. South Vietnam, April 29, 1975. Armed Forces Radio played Irving Berlin's White Christmas as a code to begin Operation Frequent Wind, the ultimate evacuation of American civilians and Vietnamese refugees by helicopter during the fall of Saigon. Milk flower petals on the street, like pieces of a girl's dress. May your days be merry and bright. He fills a cup with champagne, brings it to her lips. Open, he says. She opens. Outside, a soldier spits out his cigarette as footsteps fill the square like stones fallen from the sky. May all your Christmases be white, as the traffic guard unstraps his holster, his hand running the hem of her white dress, his black eyes, her black hair. A single candle, their shadows. 2 weeks. A military truck speeds through the intersection, the sound of children shrieking inside. A bicycle hurled through a store window. When the dust rises, a black dog lies in the road, panting, its hind legs crushed into the shine of a white Christmas. On the nightstand, a sprig of magnolia expands like a secret, heard for the first time. The treetops glisten and children listen. The chief of police, face down in a pool of Coca-Cola. A palm-sized photo of his father, soaking beside his left ear. The song, moving through the city like a widow. A white, I'm dreaming of a curtain of snow falling from her shoulders. Snow crackling against the window. Snow shredded with gunfire. Red sky. Snow on the tanks rolling over the city walls. A helicopter lifting the living just out of reach. The city so white it is ready for ink. The radio saying, run, run, run. Milk flower petals on a black dog, like pieces of a girl's dress. May your days be merry and bright. She's saying something neither of them can hear. The hotel rocks beneath them. The bed, a field of ice, cracking. Don't worry, he says, as the first bomb brightens their faces. My brothers have won the war, and tomorrow the lights go out. I'm dreaming, to hear sleigh bells in the snow. In the square below, a nun on fire runs silently toward her goal. Open, he says. She opens. Right. So this poem's clearly about the fall of Saigon, as the little sort of epilogue in prose reveals, is actually dated April 29, 1975, which is of course in ironic contrast to the quote of White Christmas, which happens in December. What's interesting about the poem is that it supposedly taps on the experiences of Ocean Vuong's mother and grandmother, who, of course, were refugees from the Vietnam War. Okay, the first lines, milk flower petals on the street, like pieces of a girl's dress, is imagistic. In fact, it reminds me a bit of Ezra Pound and imagism. And later, the repetition of milk flower petals against the black dog is quite reminiscent of Pound's famous haiku-like poem about the Paris metro, seeing beautiful people like petals on a wet black bough. It's a similar effect, I think. Here, of course, the pieces of a girl's dress might suggest the rape of Vietnam. Of course, the Americans have been defeated by the Vietnamese communists coming from the north, and that's why later in the poem, the man who's in a hotel room with the woman in what seems to be a wedding night scenario, tells her not to worry because his brothers are coming and they have won. What's interesting about the poem, of course, is the counterpoint between the melody of love, if you like, against the melody of violent conflict due to the war. Counterpoint, of course, is the use of two or more melodies in conjunction, complementing and contrasting with each other. And here in this case, the Song of White Christmas is often incorporated or played against Ocean Vuong's own lines of verse. So in the book, you can clearly see this because the lines from the song are italicized, but Ocean Vuong's lines are in normal font. So this makes for rather interesting effects because the colors of whiteness and redness and blackness are played against each other as well, visually, like a kind of visual music. So let's continue with the poem. And Aubade, by the way, of course, is a morning song or a piece of music appropriate for dawn. It may remind us of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, which features a morning after the wedding of Romeo and Juliet, when Romeo has to leave Juliet at daybreak because he has been exiled. So an Aubade is typically a poem about daybreak, about dawn, and also can involve the separation of lovers. Here, of course, it's actually the coming together of a couple who seem to be about to begin rather than end upon daybreak and the consummation of their love. And about this counterpointing, this contrasting between what goes on in the hotel room and what's outside the hotel, it is of course, unlikely to be real or even realistic. Indeed, it's a little surreal because there seems to be a kind of slow motion going on inside the hotel room compared to or contrasted with the discrete violent actions happening outside the room. So in the second stanza, he fills a teacup with champagne, brings it to her lips. The drink champagne, of course, suggests a kind of celebration. And again, typically with Ocean Vuong's poems, it's rather suggestive when the man says open, and the next line, which is a very short sentence comprising two words, says she opens. Here, of course, he's referring to her mouth, but there could be an implication of vaginal offering on the part of the woman or the bride. So this love that is going on inside the hotel room is clearly contrasted with what's outside, because the very next line says, outside a soldier spits out his cigarette as footsteps fill the square like stones fallen from the sky. So the action of spitting, of course, is disgusting, and that's in immediate and strong contrast to what's going on in the hotel room. And the simile, like stones fallen from the sky, suggests extremely loud noises, concussive almost. Then this is followed by a line from the song, May All Your Christmases Be White, which is interestingly incorporated into Ocean Vuong's own words, white as the traffic guard unstraps his holster. So what seems to be a benevolent wish is part of or becomes part of a line that ends with a preparation for killing, because the traffic guard is unstrapping his holster in preparation to shoot. Then the next stanza, his line running the hem of her white dress, is part of this slow-moving lovemaking that is starting. The short sentences: his black eyes, her black hair, a single candle sets the scene. And the final line of this stanza, their shadows 2 weeks, clearly compares them to 2 candles set aflame by passion. Wicks, of course, being, the tip of the candle that you light with a match. So here is a consummation of love and passion by 2 persons compared to 2 candles. So the very next stanza says, a military truck speeds through intersection, the sound of children shrieking inside. So again, the noise of terrified children. Then a quick action, a bicycle hurled through a store window, and then a black dog whose hind legs appear to have been crushed. But the poem actually continues the line, finishes the sentence with, crush into the shine of a white Christmas. So the bloodied, glistening hind legs of the dog merge into the shine of snow in mid-December or late December. Then this is followed by the next stanza. On the nightstand, a sprig of magnolia expands like a cigarette heard for the first time. Magnolia, of course, is a flower, again representing sort of the flowering of the passion, the surrender of the bride, the virginal surrender, because it says like a cigarette heard for the first time. There is the notion that for the couple, this is something new and exciting that they are experiencing. The next line again is from the song, the Christmas song, the treetops glisten and children listen, but it is conjoined with the murder of the police chief, who is lying in a pool of Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola, of course, being symbolic of the US and its influence, its unsuccessful attempts to dominate Vietnam. And so the chief of police clearly linked with the US presence, but here as a victim of the invasion of the communists, which eventually, by the way, led to Saigon changing its name to Ho Chi Minh City. Moving on to the next stanza, the song, the Christmas song, is described as moving through the city like a widow. The simile is interesting because this song now, instead of being happy and celebratory, is a song of mourning, because a widow obviously is mourning the death of her husband. And the song is again in ironic contrast to what is happening in Saigon. And the song itself, in fact, starts stuttering because it says a white ... ellipsis, a white ... I'm dreaming. So the song starts to stutter because clearly the context is not a Christmas celebration, but destruction by war. And then when it's incorporated with I'm dreaming of a curtain of snow falling from her shoulders, this links the action outside the hotel room to what seems to be a disrobing of the bride's white dress. And when the next line says snow crackling against the window, snow shredded with gunfire, red sky, again these are imagistic moments. Obviously, being April, there is no snow. I am not sure that Vietnam even experiences snow, although it gets cool, I think, in December. But I'm not sure that it actually gets snow. But I may be wrong about that. Here in this case, being April, definitely there is no snow. So the snow here is the snow in the Christmas song. And when it says a helicopter lifting the living just out of reach, obviously it's referring to the signature Chinook helicopter made famous by scenes, TV broadcast scenes, news scenes of evacuation of American soldiers, injured soldiers, and Saigon evacuees and so on out of Vietnam. So the next line, the city so white it is ready for ink, again attempts to link what's going on in the room, what's happening in the song with the color of the snow, to the blood that's about to be spilled or that's already spilling outside the hotel room. And here the ink is could be black, it could be red, but what it does suggest is clearly the destruction of the purity of Saigon, or the contamination of something that was formerly good. And of course the repetition run 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 tells us what panic there must have been in the fall. And then follows the two lines which I think are quite reminiscent of Ezra Pound. Milk flower petals on the black dog like pieces of a girl's dress. Again emphasizing also, of course, that this is a kind of assault. It is similar to a sexual assault. When the next stanza says, sarcastically almost, may your days be merry and bright, which is a line from the song, it is followed by Vuong's own line. She is saying something neither of them can hear. The hotel rocks beneath them. I think, of course, this situation can't be realistic. It's a bit surreal, and this surrealistic touches, these dreamscapes, if you like, are quite typical of many of Vuong's poems. It makes his images quite interesting. When he says, when the speaker says the bed of fuel of ice cracking, obviously that's an attempt to describe how the white bed sheets in the hotel room are splitting apart. But I'm not sure cracking is the best diction, but I can understand why he chose the word cracking, because it's you know, as the couple falls on the bed, lines are made, creases are made. So maybe. Okay, when the man says don't worry, as the first bomb brightens their faces, and he continues, my brothers have won the war, and tomorrow ... ellipsis, the lights go out. It's suggesting that that somehow love can prevail even though there is massive destruction and violence going on outside. I think this is part of perhaps the somewhat romantic, perhaps sentimental idea that love can conquer everything. But of course the unrealistic or surrealistic settings perhaps suggest otherwise. And then two more lines from the song I'm dreaming to hear sleigh bells in the snow. So the I'm dreaming, you could argue, undercuts this because this situation in the hotel room could just be somebody dreaming. The next stanza, in the square below, a nun on fire runs silently toward her god. Of course, President Diem, who was in charge when Saigon fell and was basically a puppet of the Americans, was notorious as a fanatic Catholic who persecuted Buddhists. And in fact, in history, nuns and monks, Buddhist monks and priests have been reported in news doing self-immolation, setting themselves on fire in protest. And so here you see a nun apparently doing this, running silently because she is determined to kill herself in protest, perhaps not knowing that the communists have come. But even if the communists triumph, I'm afraid it's not necessarily a good thing for religion, because communists believe that, as Marx said, religion is the opiate of the masses. It's a kind of opium. It's not true. It's a self-deluding fiction. That's the communist position. That's Marx's insight. So when it says a nun on fire runs silently toward her god, that protest, is who knows whether it's against the present only or perhaps also against the future. But when the line says toward her god, it perhaps it betrays a certain misunderstanding of Buddhism. I don't know. I'm not sure what Ocean Vuong's religious beliefs are, but Buddhists don't really believe in gods. So that's a bit of an open question. And of course, the poem ends open, he says, she opens, which suggests the beginning of the sexual union of the lovers, and also an opening up to a different experience, a different world. But of course, and so the poem ends. But what I think this Dawn poem suggests is quite a new and interesting view of the fall of Saigon, and it alludes to a popular Christmas song quite cleverly to present a new view of what things must have been like when Saigon became Ho Chi Minh City. Thank you. Hi, this is a video on an Ocean Vuong poem entitled Torso of Air. First I'll read out the poem, and then we'll do a commentary on the poem itself. Torso of Air. Suppose you do change your life, and the body is more than a portion of night, sealed with bruises. Suppose you woke and found your shadow replaced by a black wolf, the boy, beautiful and gone. So you take the knife to the wall instead. You carve and carve until a coin of light appears, and you get to look in, at last, on happiness. The eye staring back from the other side, waiting. This is a short poem and rather interesting, and of course it's also psychologically disturbing, or can be interpreted in a way that's potentially psychologically disturbing. So let's start with the first line. Suppose you do change your life, which is the opening short sentence. It's hypothetical, obviously, and it suggests that the speaker, perhaps Ocean Vuong himself, although we should be a bit careful about reading everything autobiographically, the speaker wanting to make some kind of reform to his currently unsatisfactory existence. The second line says, and the body is more than a portion of night. It's an interesting metaphor because it compares the body to darkness, and then rather disturbingly says that it is sealed with bruises, so suggesting abuse, suggesting some kind of physical torture. The next line, when it says, suppose you woke and found your shadow replaced by a black wolf. That's interesting, and if somebody were to take a psychoanalytic approach, one could say something about this shadow. If we wanted to take a Jungian approach, J-U-N-G, it could interpret the shadow as basically what's repressed by the speaker, and the shadow is the dark part of one's personality which has to be reconciled with. But of course, if we just read the poem literally, then the shadow is simply what is made by the body of the speaker. And the fact that it is replaced by a black wolf suggests the emergence or the substitution by something predatory, something wild, bestial. So the imagery of predation, of animalism or animality starts to take root. The boy, beautiful and gone, could suggest a disappearance, a kind of remission, if you will, of a more reasonable Apollonian kind of persona or self, or ego, shall we say. There is, of course, if one wanted to go biographical, another possible interpretation, since Vuong is an openly gay poet, which is that this is about an encounter. It is an encounter that sees the disappearance of the lover, and the aftermath of that encounter is then captured by the poem. When the poem goes on to say, so you take the knife to the wall instead, there is obviously a kind of psychological venting, an impulse or a drive towards violence, but also a kind of desperation, because to take the knife to the wall is perhaps not a very effective way to destroy anything, and all it does is a sort of a puny, futile kind of scraping on cement or brick. However, the poem does say that you carve and carve until a coin of light appears and you get to look in. So this is an apparently ultimately successful attempt. But when the speaker looks in at last, it is not on somebody or something, but it is on an emotion or an idea, which is happiness. Because the speaker gets to look in at last on happiness. This, of course, suggests the torment or the unhappiness of the speaker in his or her current life. And a little disturbingly and quite typical of the surrealistic nature of many Vuong poems, the eye staring back from the other side, waiting. Of course, this eye could be what belongs to the boy beautiful and gone, or to the speaker who is doing the perceiving, in which case it suggests a disintegration or a separation between the current self of the speaker and potentially a different and future self staring in from the other side of the wall, waiting for something to happen. Of course, it's an open question what it is exactly that the speaker is waiting for and what he can hope for. If it is his happiness, then all that waiting, doesn't seem to result in anything concrete. So this poem is very open-ended, is quite ambiguous, it's full of interesting, somewhat psychologically or psychoanalytically charged imagery, which has all the traces of a typical Vuong poem. The title, of course, Torso of Air, is itself suggestive because torso is a part of the body, typically from the neck to the waist. And so to call it Torso of Air is to suggest that this is a body that has become eviscerated. Eviscerated because the organs seem to have been removed, since this is a trunk that is apparently full of air and not of organs or flesh. So how does the title relate to the poem itself? Well, again, it has the key characteristic of focusing on the physical, a characteristic of Vuong's poems. And to say Torso of Air is to suggest something disembodied, something that is perhaps not quite real. So if this were a description of some kind of encounter between the speaker and the boy beautiful, then it undercuts this by suggesting that the body is ultimately insubstantial. So all in all, again, a poem that's psychologically complex, quite intriguing in its own way. Thank you. Bye.